We all dream of winning the lottery. We imagine that if we just had enough money, all our problems would vanish. We could buy whatever we want, stop working, and live like kings. But history teaches us a darker lesson, that sudden unearned wealth is not a blessing, it is a virus. This is the story of the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, they didn't just win the lottery, they found the bank. They discovered the largest source of silver the world had ever seen. They became the masters of the earth, the first empire on which the sun never set. They had the best army, the biggest ships, and a direct line to God. And then they watched it all burn. They learned the hardest lesson in economics, that gold is not wealth. Gold is a drug, and Spain was about to overdose. To understand this tragedy, we must travel back to a barren, freezing plateau high in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia. The year is 1545. The location is Potosí. Before this moment, Spain was a powerful nation, but it was not economically invincible. They were a society of warriors, fresh from the Reconquista, deeply religious and hardened by war. They valued the sword over the ledger. But everything changed when a local indigenous man named Diego Guelpa stumbled while chasing a llama. To catch his balance, he grabbed a bush, and when the roots pulled away from the earth, he saw it. Shimmering veins of pure silver, he had found the Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It was a geological freak of nature. It wasn't just a mine. The mountain was practically made of solid silver ore. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. This was the El Dorado they had been searching for. They immediately set to work, and Potosí transformed from a desolate wasteland into one of the largest cities in the world. Within a few decades, it had a population larger than London or Paris. It was a city of greed, violence, and unimaginable wealth. Perched at 13,000 feet above sea level where the air was so thin, men gasped for breath just walking down the street. But to get the silver out, Spain needed labor. And this is where the economic miracle begins. With a human nightmare, the Spanish instituted the Meta system, a mandatory draft of indigenous labor. Tens of thousands of men were forced into the dark, suffocating tunnels. They worked in week-long shifts, not seeing the sun, carrying heavy sacks of ore up rickety ladders. It was said that if you squeezed the silver coins of Spain, blood would drip out. The mountain was known locally as the mountain that eats men. But digging the ore was only half the battle. The ore was low grade. To extract the pure silver, the Spanish used a new industrial technology, the mercury amalgamation process. They mixed the crushed rock with toxic mercury and had men trample it with their bare feet. This process was a chemical revolution. It allowed Spain to extract silver at an industrial scale never seen before in human history. The output was staggering. Between 1550 and 1800, Mexico and Peru produced 80% of the world's silver, and most of it went to Spain. They melted it down into bars and minted the most famous coin in history, the piece of 8. This was the first global currency, the dollar of the Renaissance. It was accepted in markets from Shanghai to Seville, from Boston to Bombay. Twice a year, the Flota de Indias, the treasure fleets, would gather in Havana. These were massive convoys of galleons, heavily armed, riding low in the water, weighed down by billions of dollars in today's money. When they appeared on the horizon off the coast of Spain, church bells would ring across the country. The king breathed a sigh of relief. The bankers rubbed their hands. The party could continue for another year. Spain became the superpower of Europe instantly. They had the tercios, the feared infantry squares that were undefeated on the battlefield. They built massive cathedrals adorned with gold leaf. The King of Spain, Charles V, and later his son Philip II, were the masters of the universe. They believed God had chosen Spain to lead the world, but they made a fatal calculation. They looked at their piles of silver and said, "We are rich." They didn't realize that they were actually planting the seeds of their own destruction. They were confusing money with wealth. Money is just a medium of exchange. Wealth is the ability to produce things. Food, clothes, tools, ships. Spain had found infinite money, but they were about to stop producing wealth. The silver was acting like a narcotic. It provided a massive high, a feeling of invincibility. But deep inside the economy, the vital organs were shutting down. The farmers were leaving the fields. The blacksmiths were putting down their hammers. Why work when the ships are coming? The addiction had begun. Imagine you are a shoemaker in the city of Seville in the year 1550. Seville is the gateway to the Americas. It is the boomtown of the world. Suddenly, the ships arrive. The sailors pour off the decks with pockets full of silver. The nobles have money. The soldiers have money. Everyone wants to buy your shoes. So what do? You do what any rational businessman does. You raise your prices. Now imagine this happening to everyone, everywhere, all at once. The baker raises the price of bread. The landlord raises the rent. The weaver raises the price of cloth. This is what economic historians call the price revolution. It was the first major inflationary crisis in modern history. As tons of silver flooded into Spain, the supply of money skyrocketed. But the supply of goods, the actual number of shoes and loaves of bread, stayed the same. In previous centuries, prices in Europe had been flat. A loaf of bread cost the same in 1500 as it did in 1400. But now, prices in Spain rose by 400. In a modern economy, we are used to 2 or 3 inflation. But in the medieval world, this was a catastrophe. It shattered the social contract. The poor were crushed. Wages did not keep up with prices. A Spanish peasant found that even though there was more silver in the country than ever before, he could buy less food than his grandfather did. Starvation returned to the countryside. Not because there was no food, but because the money was broken. But the rich faced a different paradox, one that would destroy the Spanish industry. Because inflation made everything in Spain so expensive, Spanish goods became uncompetitive. Let's go back to our shoemaker. His shoes now cost 10 silver coins because he has to pay so much for leather and food. But a shoemaker in France, or England, where the gold hasn't flooded in yet, can make the same shoes for 2 silver coins. So what does the Spanish consumer do? He stops buying Spanish shoes. He buys the imported French shoes. Spain became a funnel. The silver would arrive in Seville, be unloaded by the ton, and within weeks, it would flow out of the country to France, England, the Netherlands, and Italy to pay for imports. Spain was doing all the hard work. Enslaving the miners, sailing the dangerous oceans, fighting the pirates, only to hand the money over to their rivals to buy dinner. A famous saying from the time emerged, Spain is the mouth that receives the food, chewing it for the rest of Europe. Or, as a French observer laughed, everything is dear in Spain except silver. This economic reality changed the culture of Spain. In England and the Netherlands, the merchant class was rising. They were building factories, shipyards, and textile mills to sell goods to the rich Spanish. But in Spain, working for a living became seen as shameful. The ideal Spaniard was not the merchant, but the hidalgo, the son of something. The hidalgo was a minor noble who owned land, did no manual labor, and lived off a government pension or rent. The influx of easy money created a society of consumers and bureaucrats. The dream was to get a government job near the silver tap, not to start a business. The famous Spanish literature of this time, like Don Quixote or the picaresque novels, is full of these characters. Impoverished nobles who are starving to death but refuse to work because it is beneath them. They would rather polish their armor and pretend to be rich than dirty their hands with trade. While the Dutch were inventing the stock market and the English were improving agriculture, Spain was building churches and buying fancy velvet capes. They were becoming hollow. The economy looked shiny and golden on the outside, adorned with the plunder of the Americas. But inside it was rotting. There was no production. There was no innovation. There was only the wait for the next fleet. And this reliance on the fleet created a terrifying vulnerability. The entire stability of the empire depended on wooden ships crossing an ocean full of storms and enemies. If the wind didn't blow, the king couldn't eat. And the king, Philip II, had a very large appetite. He didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to rule the world. And he was about to spend the silver before it even arrived. King Philip II was the most powerful man on earth. He sat in his massive gloomy palace, El Escorial, surrounded by monks and mountains of paperwork. He ruled Spain, Portugal, parts of Italy, the Netherlands, the Philippines, and the Americas. He was the planet king. But holding the planet is expensive. Philip saw himself not just as a king, but as the sword of God. He believed it was his divine duty to defend Catholicism against the Protestant Reformation, spreading through Europe and the Ottoman Turks, expanding in the Mediterranean. This meant he had to fight everyone, everywhere, all the time. This led to the wars of ego. And wars are not cheap. He fought the Ottoman Turks in the Mediterranean, culminating in the massive Battle of Lepanto. He fought the French for supremacy in Italy. But his biggest bleeding wound was the Netherlands. The Netherlands was a Spanish possession, but it was also the birthplace of capitalism and Protestantism. The Dutch rebelled. Philip sent the army of Flanders to crush them. This began the 80 Years' War. It was a logistical nightmare. To get soldiers to the Netherlands, Spain had to march them along the Spanish road from Italy through the Alps into northern Europe. They had to pay, feed, and clothe 70,000 men thousands of miles from home for decades. And because Spanish industry had been hollowed out by inflation, they couldn't make their own weapons. Spain often had to buy gunpowder and cannons from foreign merchants, sometimes even from the Dutch themselves. The silver from Potosí was literally funding the enemies of Spain. Then came the obsession with England. Queen Elizabeth I was a Protestant heretic in Philip's eyes, and her privateers, men like Francis Drake, were stealing his silver ships. In 1588, Philip made the ultimate gamble. He launched the Spanish Armada. It was the most expensive naval force ever assembled in human history. 130 ships, 30,000 men, thousands of cannons. The cost was astronomical. To pay for it, Philip didn't use the silver he had, he used the silver he hoped to get. This brings us to the dark side of Spanish finance, the asientos. The asientos were short-term, high-interest loans provided by German and Genoese bankers, families like the Fugers and the Welsers. Philip II was essentially taking out payday loans on an imperial scale. He would go to the bankers and say, "Lend me 5 million ducats now to build the Armada, and I will pay you back when the treasure fleet arrives in 6 months." The bankers, seeing the massive ships of gold, agreed. They charged 10, 20, sometimes 40 interest. But the Armada was a disaster. It wasn't defeated by a superior navy. It was defeated by bad weather, bad luck, and rigid tactics. Storms smashed the Spanish fleet against the rocks of Scotland and Ireland. Half the fleet sank. Thousands of sailors drowned. When the news reached Philip, he reportedly said, "I sent my ships to fight against men, not against the winds and waves of God." But the bankers didn't care about God's winds. They wanted their money. The ships were at the bottom of the ocean. The cannons were rusting in the salt water. The investment was gone. But the debt remained, and the interest was ticking. The resource curse had now evolved into a debt trap. By the 1570s, the interest payments on the national debt were larger than the entire tax revenue of the Spanish Empire. Think about that. Every penny the government collected in taxes, plus every ounce of silver that arrived from America, was not enough even to pay the interest on the loans. They weren't paying down the principal. They were just treading water. The king was trapped on a treadmill. He had to borrow more money just to pay off the old money. He mortgaged the future of Spain for generations. He sold the rights to collect taxes. He sold noble titles. He squeezed the peasantry until they had nothing left. The bankers in Genoa effectively owned the Spanish Empire. The gold would arrive in Seville, be unloaded, and immediately transferred to the ledgers of Italian bankers. Spain was just a shipping company for its creditors, and the system was stretched to the breaking point. All it would take was one bad year, one hurricane sinking a fleet, or one pirate raid for the house of cards to collapse. We tend to think of sovereign default, a country going bankrupt, as a modern phenomenon. We think of Greece or Argentina or Venezuela. But Philip II of Spain was the father of the sovereign default. He did it bigger and louder than anyone else in history. The breaking point came in 1557. The wars in France and the Netherlands had drained the treasury. The treasure fleet was slightly delayed. The bankers refused to lend any more coin. Philip II stood before his court and issued a royal decree. He declared that Spain was suspending all payments to its creditors. He essentially looked at the most powerful bankers in Europe and said, "I'm not paying you." It was a financial earthquake. In Antwerp and Genoa, banks collapsed overnight. Wealthy families lost everything. The credit markets of Europe froze. It was the 16th century equivalent of the 2008 financial crisis, but caused by one man. But here's the tragedy. It didn't stop the spending. It just made it more expensive. Because Spain was addicted to war and addicted to imports, they had to keep borrowing. After the default, the bankers eventually came back. But now they charged even higher interest rates to account for the risk. The debt spiral accelerated. Spain defaulted again in 1575, and again in 1596, and again in 1607, 1627, and 1647. It became a generational cycle. Borrow, spend, crash. Borrow, spend, crash. The impact on the Spanish people was horrific. When the king couldn't pay his soldiers, the soldiers mutinied. In 1576, unpaid Spanish troops sacked the city of Antwerp, their own city, burning it to the ground in the Spanish fury. This act destroyed the financial center of Northern Europe and pushed the Dutch to fight even harder for independence. Back home in Spain, the government tried a new, desperate measure. Since all the silver was flowing out to foreign bankers, there was no money left for daily commerce within Spain. So the crown began to debase the currency. They stopped minting silver coins for the public, and started minting coins made of pure copper, called vellon. It was junk money. It had no intrinsic value. The king would mint billions of these copper coins and force the people to accept them at the value of silver. It was a hidden tax. The result, predictably, was hyperinflation on top of the silver inflation. Prices fluctuated wildly. People began hoarding silver and refusing to accept copper. The economy bifurcated. The rich and the government dealt in silver while the poor were left trading worthless copper tokens. The middle class was wiped out. By the mid-1600s, the Spanish century was dead. The mines of Potosí began to dry up. The veins ran thin. But because Spain had spent 100 years buying things instead of learning how to make things, they had nothing to fall back on. They had no wool industry like England. They had no banking sector like the Dutch. They had no luxury manufacturing like France. The cities of Castile, once bustling with trade, emptied out. Populations fell. The fields lay fallow. Spain descended into a long, dark slumber of poverty and irrelevance. The empire that had owned the world became known as the sick man of Europe. Meanwhile, the countries that had taken Spain's silver, England and the Netherlands, used that capital to invest. They built merchant fleets. They funded scientific research. They built the stock exchange. They realized the ultimate truth of economics. That wealth isn't the metal you dig out of the ground. It's the productivity of your people. The Dutch used Spanish silver to build the ships that would dominate global trade. The British used Spanish silver to fund the Industrial Revolution. Spain was the conduit, the funnel through which the wealth of the Americas flowed to create the modern world, leaving Spain itself hollowed out and empty. The story of the Spanish Empire is the ultimate warning to any nation or individual. It is the story of the resource curse. Whether it's silver in 1550 or oil in the modern day, easy money breaks the link between work and reward. It creates the illusion of prosperity, but it is a rot that eats the foundation. Spain drowned in gold. They thought they were the masters of their destiny, but they were slaves to their own fortune. Thank you for watching. If you want to understand more about how economies rise and fall, make sure to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.